Hello and welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk to real lawyers about their lives in and out of the practice of law, how they got to be lawyers, and what their experience has been. I'm Lewis Goodman, the host of the show, and yes, I'm a lawyer. Nobody's perfect. He spent his entire legal career representing people charged with crimes. He's represented the indigent in every type of criminal proceeding, including murder. He zealously fights for his clients. He has tried numerous misdemeanor and felony cases to jury verdict. Matt Dalton, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Thanks a lot, Lewis. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure talking to you. We've known each other for quite some time. You were in the public defender's office and around Alameda County, and I've been around Alameda County for a while. And I've just always kind of admired the way you present yourself in court. You seem to be very comfortable there and prepared and competent.
Thanks a lot. I try really hard over many years to pretend, at least, that I know what the heck I'm talking about.
Where's your office now?
I have an office in Berkeley.
Where are you from originally?
That's a complicated answer. My parents are from Lincoln, Nebraska. I lived there for a very short period of time when I was really young. And then they moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where they both went to college. And then they split up, and I moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina with my father for a number of years, and then ended up in West Lafayette, Indiana, back with my mother, who had married a guy who became a professor, my stepfather, who became a professor at Purdue. So I bounced around a lot over the course of, between 0 and 18.
And it seems like you were in kind of academic environments.
Yes. My father is a pharmacologist, and he started teaching at University of North Carolina. And my stepfather, again, is a professor. So he was teaching at Purdue and now teaches at University of North Carolina, Asheville. So I grew up in college towns my entire life. And now I live in Berkeley. So, it's come full circle.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to a couple of different high schools. I went to Chapel High School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then I went to Lafayette Jeff, which is in Lafayette, Indiana.
How was your high school experience?
Those are very interesting. They're very, very different. Chapel Hill was it's a university town. It's a fairly wealthy area. The Research Triangle Park is there. So there's a lot of different types of kids, mostly, pretty academically inclined kids. And Lafayette Jeff, Lafayette and West Lafayette are two towns next to each other. West Lafayette's the university town. Lafayette is more of a blue-collar, working-class town. So my junior and senior year, I went there, and it was a great experience. It really, taught me a lot about different avenues in life, and I thought it was a great experience. And I still have friends from both of those places to this day, for sure.
So you were both kind of town and gown.
Exactly. And my parents, because I spent most of my youth until I was probably 14 or 15 years old, they were in school. They were students. And they were living a student lifestyle with two kids who were, either preteen or teenagers. So, we didn't have a lot. We definitely did not live particularly well. And in many ways, at the same time, it was a totally great experience.
Well, when you graduated from high school, where'd you go to college?
So I graduated from Lafayette, Jeff, and then I went to Indiana University, which is in Bloomington, which was a fantastic experience. It was a great place.
Yeah, I've been there. It's a phenomenal campus, just absolutely classic, big Midwestern university, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And when I was there as well, Bobby Knight was still there. So the basketball scene was raging. And so all of that was super fun. And it's a Big Ten, large school. Sports were big. And I met some friends that I still have to this day. So it was another really good experience. I enjoyed it a lot. And they also have a really great music program there, don't they?
They have a great music program. In fact, one of my roommates when I was in college was in the music program, and he played saxophone, and he was incredibly good. So we would sit around at night, listen to him play, and that was quite good. It was fun. And, my best man at my wedding was a roommate there, so I've stayed in touch with him. I'm actually going back even further. My wife I met in high school, so we went to the prom together. So that was another reason why I really enjoyed Lafayette, Indiana.
So were you involved in any sort of activities in college? Anything that you want to share?
I played tennis in high school, and I was pretty competitive at it. I took it seriously. It wasn't necessarily great, but I played a lot of tennis, not for the university. It's too big and way too many talented people there for that type of thing. But I played a lot of tennis there, and I played a lot of basketball because, again, I grew up in Chapel Hill and Indiana, and both of those places, if there was a ball and a basket, everyone was going over and playing. So I played a ton of those two sports when I was at that age group. And I still play both of those things today.
What did you take up academically there?
I was a political science major. I think I also majored in history. My stepfather's a political science professor. So he, in many ways, influenced me a great deal in kind of my profession and kind of that growth into being a lawyer. So by the time I got into college, I was very interested in politics.
Well, you must have done something right at Bloomington because you graduated Phi Beta Kappa.
I studied I had one great year I studied all the time and was really diligent about it. And then I had, 3 relatively solid years. Yeah, I took it seriously. I was from an academic family that took school seriously. High school, I did not take particularly seriously. I was kind of a goof off. But by the time I got into college, I got a bit fearful of, what would happen if I didn't do well. So I really buckled down and tried really hard.
When did you decide you wanted to go to law school?
It's funny because, as I said, my stepfather was a lawyer. And so growing up around him, and he came in our lives when I was quite young. I was like 8 or 9 years old. So he definitely impressed upon me a lot of skill sets that lawyers have. I didn't necessarily know I was going to become a lawyer until maybe I was a sophomore and junior in college, where I was just starting to kind of game out what the possibilities were. And one was going to academics. That seemed a little bit boring, even though now it sounds great. But so it's kind of that. When I started figuring out what avenues were open to me, being a lawyer seemed like something I should pursue.
So after you graduated from Indiana, did you go directly to law school or did you take a little time off?
I took some time off and I moved back down to where my father was living down in North Carolina. And I basically worked lousy jobs. I worked in a factory. I worked in a couple warehouses, over the course of about a year, a little more than a year, and just saved a bunch of money to go travel. And I traveled some as well.
Do you think that experience, that working and doing some traveling, kind of made you a more serious, dedicated law student when you finally did get to law school?
I think that helped. I think taking a year off and experiencing things.
Yeah, I kind of came to law school sort of a similar route, and I just found that I hadn't been that focused in college, but when I got to law school, I really knew what I didn't want to do. So it made me, pretty clear on the notion of, go to law school. This is a good idea.
Yeah. You realize, how pampered you are in many ways when you have options.
Where did you go to law school?
I went to UC Hastings in San Francisco, which was like completely random. I had never been in California in my life before I actually drove here. I felt like San Francisco seemed like a really interesting place to move. Yeah,
I went to Hastings too, and in a lot of ways that was my experience too.
Yeah, what kind of triggered your move here? Like what sealed the deal in order for you to do it?
I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I'd applied to several places, and Hastings was really the best school that I got into, and it was in San Francisco. So,
right.
It really wasn't much of an issue for me when it really came down to it. So, what was your experience at Hastings like?
Hastings at the time, I guess I would I put it in 2 different places. One is like my first year experience, which was quite rigorous academically. I studied very hard. I took it really seriously, like most of my classmates. And at the same time, I met some cool people that I, again, still remain friends with. And then after the first year, I suddenly realized that all the effort I put into it, which meant a lot, and I did fine. But I also realized that there's a lot of other things going on in the Bay Area, which I had no idea. I mean, I'd never been here before. And so after the first year, I really spent more time getting to know the area. I still worked hard in law school, and I started plugging into what turned out to be, what my profession was going to be, which is in the public defender area. So overall, I think Hastings has a reputation for being kind of difficult socially, potentially. It's kind of in a weird area of San Francisco, and it's pretty competitive. At the same time, my experience was all in all extremely positive.
Yeah, mine too. I really enjoyed Hastings. I've said that before on this podcast, but I for me, the time I spent at Hastings was, in general, a good time.
Yeah. I mean, law school's got a really bad reputation for being unpleasant, and there are moments of unpleasantness, but Hastings is also, I'm curious what you think. I mean, I like the fact that it's quite sizable. I mean, there's a lot of kids there, so you can always find people that you fit in with.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is not easy, in other places, I imagine.
I've never gone to a really small school. I mean, I went to the University of Rochester, which isn't, nearly the size of Indiana, but it's not really a small school either.
Right.
So.
Right.
Well, after you got out of law school, what was your first legal job?
I'd worked in law school at a couple public defenders' offices. One was in Cocoa in Contra Costa County, summered there. And I worked in Marin County public defender's office when I was a third year. And that really cemented, very quickly I realized this is where I want to be. And so I got a job at Georgetown University as what they call the Prettyman Fellowship, which is a kind of a criminal defense / clinical instructor 2-year position in Washington, D.C., which is, and Georgetown University Law Center is like right on Capitol Hill. So I went there for 2 years.
Right. And the federal courthouse there is named after Mr. Prettyman as well, isn't it?
Yes, the courthouse. Yep. And I was there. It was funny. I was there starting in 1990, which was the grand jury and of the, Monica Lewinsky Clinton thing. So every day I would drive by the Barrett Prettyman courthouse, and there would be a row of journalists who had essentially slept outside overnight to wait for the perp walks in the morning. I remember Jordan going through there. I mean, all these people who came and testified during those hearings. And it was a crazy time to be in Washington.
I'm not sure there's ever been a time to be in Washington that isn't kind of crazy.
That's probably true. That's probably true.
So after you left Georgetown in Washington, D.C., you came back to the Bay Area?
Yeah, so, I really liked D.C. My wife had lived in D.C. for a year or so before she came out to live in California when I was in law school. But, when I left the Bay Area, I just was so smitten with it that I got that job at Georgetown and really could not turn it down. So I just committed myself to coming back out here no matter what. So after 2 years at Georgetown, I immediately came back out here and had to take the bar, because I had taken the DC bar the first time around. So I had to take the bar and start practice again.
How long was it between the first time you took a bar exam and the second time you took a bar exam?
So it was 2 years. I took the DC bar and then did the fellowship and then took the California bar, which is a lot harder, a lot longer. It was 3 days back then. I think it's no longer that. But I took the DC, 2-year difference, which was a lot, actually. It didn't sound like that much, but over that 2-year period, I lost a lot of memory of what's on the bar exams.
Yeah, I've taken 2 bar exams as well. I took California, and then 7 or 8 years later, I took Hawaii. I had to restudy, completely right from the beginning, and it was it's kind of this weird experience because it brought me right back to first year of law school as I'm going through contracts, torts, property, criminal procedure. It was like, whoa.
I mean, it's the first time everyone's doing it. You're with generally the same crew of people you went to law school with.
Right.
Or people in like situations. The second time you take it, usually you have a life by then. So you're all alone, and that's my experience is like, oh boy, get up and study for the bar again. Like you're saying, it's like the first year of law school all over again.
Yeah, my experience was that I was studying for it, and I was living in Maui at the time, and everybody else who was taking the bar was living in Honolulu, and so I was literally all by myself with the outlines and the tapes, and
I'd have to have like no window if I was in Maui. I'd just go down in the basement and cave and try to do it. Yeah, no, it's just not as, when you take it the first time, there's like this adrenaline rush, and you're like, God, to get this thing over with. And the second time, you're like, oh no, because you remember it's actually kind of a painful. I still remember it being painful and stressful, even though I passed both times, but it's still unpleasant.
Right. So, okay, so you take the California bar, you pass. What do you go do for work?
So, I had to wait because I essentially didn't have a bar card in California for several months. And I got very fortunate to an old friend of mine from law school, who's a public defender, still to this day in San Francisco, had just left a position in a small firm, two guys in San Francisco, and I ended up at criminal defense. I ended up going to work for these guys, this is Chris Cannon and Scott Sugarman, who I'm still in contact with today. They were super kind to me and really, really good to learn from. Yeah,
Scott, he's a University of Rochester guy.
No, is he right? I forgot he went there. Scott is hilarious. I adore Scott. Yeah, great lawyer, total character.
Now, how did you get over to Alameda County Public Defender's Office?
So, I got a job first in Marin County Public Defender. So as soon as I got the bar passage, and I had to wait because how public defenders hire kind of, based on financial situations, usually like in December or something. So I had to wait, and then I got a job. There was an opening in Marin County Public Defenders, and I got hired there. At the same time, I had an application in Alameda County, and ended up getting hired in Alameda County as well. After I'd been in Marin for maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe it's 5 months, something like less than a year, and then came over to Alameda County. Yeah.
So tell me about an early experience in the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, an early case you tried or some little nugget from there.
It's a good question. Alameda County, right when I got there, I realized I had hit the jackpot, both in the sense of the office itself and the people in the office, but also I think the surrounding community, the judges and the DA's office and everyone else. I felt like it was a good place to have a lengthy career because, while there's a lot of conflict and all those kind of things, there's opportunities to do good work and be rewarded for that. I guess, it's funny. The cases I remember the most from early in my career were cases, oddly enough, that I lost, but I felt like I did extremely good or solid work. And that's, I think that doesn't surprise me on some level because I getting into this type of work, I realized pretty early on that if you're coming here for the glory of victory as a public defender, you're probably going to be left somewhat, disappointed because it's difficult. But I think the case I remember the most early on, which it's not necessarily a great, happy memory, was a felony case with a client I really liked a lot for a variety of different reasons. He was just a total character. And I couldn't convince him that the case should not go to trial. And he went to trial and he got walloped. And the case was a terrible defense. But the happy part of that, which is, you have to dig in there a little bit sometimes, was that the client and I were very tight. I felt for him that this had all happened, and it happened on my watch. But I stayed in touch with him. He contacts me, every couple months and asks me how I'm doing.
Yeah. You remember Randy Hooper in the DA's office?
Yes.
Well, Randy and I were very friendly. We were DAs together. And, Randy he'd come pretty close to playing pro baseball. And I remember one time we were working some case together and we lost it. And Randy and I were walking back upstairs and he says, You know, it's just like playing sports. You always learn a whole lot more from your losses than your wins.
That's true.
And I've always remembered that.
Really true. And this was early on in my career. It was like the first real beatdown, because I had come in through Oakland initially and done a bunch of misdemeanor trials there. And I didn't lose any. I lost no misdemeanor trials my first stint. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm fantastic. And that was my first time of really getting walloped. And the funny thing is, I said, not to repeat myself, but I took away from that more value than all the other stuff that I had done up to that point.
What do you really like about practicing law? You've been doing it for a while now.
I think it's people. I like people, and I knew very early on in law school, as I said, that I was going to be a public defender or a criminal defense attorney. And part of that was the people that are in that practice. They're, the public defender's office are kind of filled with misfits and kind of odd, sometimes very extreme personalities. And I mean that in a good way. And I realized right away that I was going to fit into that crowd, despite the fact that I don't necessarily, rant and rave and act like a nut all the time. I was very comfortable there.
Would you recommend law as a career choice for a young person who was coming out of college?
I think, it's funny, back to my stepfather. My stepfather tried to talk me out of law school many, many times. I remember, and I always tell him he was like 20% right for me. I think it really depends on the person. I think if you're going to go to law school, or that's kind of the direction you're headed, you should have a good reason why you want to do that. You may not know what you want to be, what type of law you want to practice, but you should probably have some idea why you're doing it, some vague sense of what position you want to play in the legal world. And if you have that, then I think that gets you a long way. The other thing I would say is you have to understand what you're getting yourself into. I remember a professor of mine, I think it was first year property, who, apropos of nothing about property, said to us, you're getting ready to enter into a profession where someone is bringing you their most important problem they have in their entire life at that moment, potentially the most important problem they're going to have, in their whole life. And it's an awesome responsibility. And I remember thinking to myself, like, of course, that is kind of what it can be, whether it's a divorce, or whether it's, a contract or a financial transaction, or it's criminal defense or prosecution, whatever it is. So what I tell people who ask me is, if you have to understand the gravity of the job you're getting ready to do and really respect that. And if you do that and you have an idea why you want to go there, I think you're going to do really well. If you're going there just because you kind of look at the dollars and cents that you can make, I have a lot of friends from law school who did that probably and made a lot of money very quickly when they got out, but didn't last very long because it's a hard job to do if you don't love it. So you gotta have a reason to be doing it. I mean, what do you think, Louis? I mean, I'm curious. Oh
yeah, I agree completely. My dad was a lawyer, and so I kind of saw a certain kind of practice up close. He didn't do any criminal work, but I was sort of aware of what I was getting into. But I think that what that property professor said is really spot on. I mean, people come to lawyers, and like you say, regardless of what kind of case it is, not because they're having their best time in life. And it really is an awesome responsibility that we take on. And it's even true for prosecutors, when you're dealing with victims of crime, and these people are at just a terrible place for something terrible that happened to them. Yeah. And I think sometimes from the defense side, we kind of lose sight of that. But having been over there, I realize it's really no different. No, I think you're totally right. Do you think the legal system is fair? No, I mean, I think that the legal system is like America generally, and that is it strives to be fair, but it comes up short quite a bit. What, if anything, would you change if you could? That's a very good question. I think as far as structurally, I think that some changes are being made. I think that the jury system has to be much more representative of the client base in a given population. I think that we've all had experiences where there's a certain
demographic judging our clients that don't have an appreciation for what our clients go through on a daily basis. I think that sentences have to come down on some level. The percentage of Americans locked up in prison when you compare that to almost any other country in the world, especially so-called developed countries, we're way out in front. And there's something deeply wrong in any system that lets that happen.
How is practicing law fit into your family life? You've been married for a long time, you have a family. How's being a lawyer and being a family person gone together?
I think that was one of the reasons I left the public defender's office. Not that I was very happy there in many, many ways. I knew when I left that I was leaving the best job I'd ever have. But I had two kids that were, under 10 years old, and I felt quite a bit of stress considering that I just couldn't make my own schedule. I basically had to be where I was supposed to be, do what I needed to do on a daily basis. And I had very little flexibility. So once I went into private practice and I just had more opportunities to schedule things and work around my kids and my wife and all of those things, it really helped out. So the short of it is that, once Marvin and I left the public defender's office, things became much, much easier, and I was a much, much better family person.
What sort of things do you like to do recreationally?
Living in California, it's a lot of outdoor stuff. If I can, both my kids really enjoy backpacking.
Right. If you couldn't be a lawyer, is there some job that you think you would like to have?
If I couldn't be a lawyer, I would teach.
What sort of things keep you up at night?
I think the things that keep me up most at night are my kids and just worrying, non-specifically about what they're doing and how they're going to navigate things.
Let's say you came into some real money, a couple of $1 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
If I came up if I got a bunch of money, I probably would more or less retire criminal practice, other than maybe have one case at a time, like a really significant one that was interesting. And I'd spend a lot of time with my wife trying to travel. Once the kids were gone, on their own, I would travel.
All right. I have this question. One thing that I always associate with you is this really cool little move that you do with a pen. I would like to know what that's about and where you learned it.
So I learned that in 10th grade, Chapel High School debate club. There was a kid who knew how to do that and taught me how to do it. And I spent the next 6 months dropping my pen in every class I was in until I got it down.
Matt Dalton, thank you so much for joining me today on Love Thy Lawyer. I appreciate your sharing your career experience and your flipping a pen experience. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Lewis. I really appreciate it. It was very fun to talk about.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. Many thanks to my guests who have contributed their time and wisdom and make this show possible. Thanks as always to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Lewis Goodman.
We were both morons in kind of the safety areas. We both got caught up on a mountain in the Rockies without proper gear. And long story short, we did a number of different things that definitely should have killed one or both of us.